Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, episode 59, Ryan and Ethereal. I'm here today with Ryan, who has a setting and independent RPG system called Ethereal. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited for it. So before we get started on talking about Ethereal, can you tell us who you are outside of RPG design and playing?
I'm Ryan. I'm lead designer of Ethereal at Fineground Cryptids. I've been doing um, a lot of RPG stuff for like 15 years. It's a strong passion and hobby of mine that's kind of just taken off in the last couple years more specifically.
Is that because of like the OGL thing a few years ago, where like Wizards was gonna start charging third-party content creators for stuff?
Yeah, that was definitely part of it because we have our own 5e world that my high school friends and I have played in for about 4 to 5 years now, and then I have some guys from college that we do our own world in, and it kind of came to the point where it's like I'm a really big fan of world building and my own homebrew world stuff, but it's like I was always afraid to do anything more with it because of like that situation. So it kind of came to the point where I was like, maybe it's time to give a shot at creating something just brand new and fresh that you don't see a lot of.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that announcement really scared a lot of people away from doing smaller projects within D&D instead of going off on their own or using a different license.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was even a time where the main reason I started even doing D&D and RPGs in general is I love world building. Like for myself, I wrote like a book trilogy at one point, and then my goal was to eventually write even something that was set in my D&D world. But because of that, I was just like, you know what? Maybe we just won't even spend time on that because nothing's really gonna ever happen from that. It's not worth the time, and then just to get shut down.
hmm Yeah, no, I can see that. So are you a writer, RPG designer? What's the
I'd
background
say
there?
yeah, so more RPG designer now. So I did writing as a passion and a hobby back through college, more for myself than anyone, but that kind of evolved into me wanting to do RPG stuff because of the world building aspect, and then that kind of evolved into, well, I want to create my own system, which I have two other people that I work on Ethereal with.
hmm
And but outside of that, like my day-to-day job is I'm in advertising, so that's it's fun to get to be creative both at work and then outside of work also on passions.
Okay, cool. So you're doing the actual content creation for advertising?
No, so I do like the media where we do like somebody will create the ad and they'll come to us and be like, oh, where do we reach people the best way, and like how do we actually target these people? So I'm the guy that you can get mad at whenever you get served an ad on YouTube, basically.
Okay, so you're like
Yeah.
okay, I think I understand. So you're like
Yeah.
creating the campaigns that people are doing, but you're
Yeah,
not actually
exactly. We
like,
do like the dates and the budget allocation and
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, it's interesting. I had a interview with someone else that's doing like data analysis for like where to hit people for that.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, we do something similar, which actually there's a lot of things from that kind of get to when you're designing your own system, you can really like lead that into that also trying to figure out the best way to reach people and get into that psychology aspect that advertising has a lot of levels of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you got into D&D in college or before that?
Before then actually, so I started back in high school, so my whole RPG background was I started with forum RPGs on a couple different forums. That was kind of my first taste at it, and
hmm
then some high school buddies, which are guys I still talk to today. That was back in like 2010, I think it was. So like 15 years ago. Some high school buddies who are actually still friends with me today. We still do D&D campaigns. They're going to do ethereal playtesting with me.
Cool.
They introduced me to Pathfinder originally. Then we kind of did some 5e games. No, I think that was 4e back then actually. Yeah, I think it was some 4e and then we slowly evolved into 5e over time. But I mean that was back in like in high school. Nobody really took the game seriously, so it was very rules light compared to what we probably should have been following for the rules. But we're young teens, so we didn't care as much about that. And the campaigns always felt fell apart after one or two sessions, but that was kind of a my my early introduction to it, where I still remember one of my first characters was literally just a knockoff of I think it was Archer was one of my earliest characters, a knockoff of Archer from the show.
Okay.
And and then that lasted for I think two sessions, and then we played Pathfinder for one session, and then we played a superhero one. I think it was Mutants and Masterminds. I think a little bit later on, like I think that was like more near the end of high school. We played Mutants and Masterminds for two sessions, and then we went to 5e for a session or something like that. I don't remember the exact timeline, but we were bouncing around systems, and then we kind of all just like went our
You
separate
guys
ways.
just like making characters, it sounds like.
Oh, that's essentially it. I actually I think I was the one guy that I said to them like, can we play the same game for more than like one session so we could actually do something? And then like they're like, oh yeah, sure. And then the next game was another system again. I was like, all right. And we took like I think we took a couple year breaks. We all went off to college and university.
Yeah.
And then when it really picked up for us again was I think, and this is something a lot of people could probably relate to, was 2020 for COVID. I was trying to like find something to do on like on Roll20, and I just reached out to a bunch of them. I'm like, hey guys, if I host a game, do you want to play? And then
Mhm.
that was like where it really kicked off for me. Now I'm essentially a forever DM, which I'm not complaining because, like I said, I like world building. We've now ran since then two online campaigns, and then I'm running an in-person campaign for a different group of people. It kind of went from like playing a little bit every so often to every other week now we've been playing basically at least one game.
That's really cool. That forum that you said you were getting interested initially, was that N World or a different one?
No, that was actually funny enough. It was the Game Maker forum, Yo-Yo Games.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to get into programming, like obviously didn't land in programming, but I was trying to get into coding for a very long time. So I was spending time on the Game Maker forum, and they had like a little forum game section, and that's actually spent a lot of my time there, just playing various forum games.
I feel like a lot of forums had like a game section that,
Yeah,
yeah, seemed to work decently well until we
yeah,
got like more advanced versions for Roll20.
yeah, exactly. That was way before Discord and stuff like that, and Roll20, and that's of course nobody had like a real defined way of how they wanted to play. You had some people that wanted to be very role play, and other people would be like, I walk here, I do this.
Well, yeah, but it's always like the initial post would have like a here's the what we're doing with this one, here's the rules and the expectation.
Yeah, I tried doing like a really advanced one where it was like it's a very knockoff of Pokemon called Scan Fighters, where you basically had like these little characters, and I drew art for it, and then I'd have all these like breakdowns of like what's in your inventory and stuff like that, and I'd run that for like 6 or 7 months, and then that kind of just fell apart. But it was probably one of the more advanced ones on that forum. So always had that DM heart inside me.
Yeah, there's a comic artist that I was watching for, well, reading for a while, and he finished the storyline he was doing, and then he started doing illustrated forum games for his
Oh,
creativity
nice.
now.
Wow. I find it's like one of those things you can really see that in people like from like very young age or even early on. Like they do something that just kind of has that tie back to DMing, and they kind of just grow into that role naturally because it's just the kind of thing they like. If it's either storytelling or world building or even just like leading games and stuff like that in general.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely what the case for him. He was doing a D&D based comic, so like I'm not
Oh, okay,
surprised.
nice. Yeah, kind of natural.
Yeah. So did you transition into DMing because you wanted to like actually play a campaign instead of just like a initial setup?
Yeah, it was that, but it came more to the world building because when I wrote this like sci-fi trilogy for myself, I realized that like I didn't have the expertise at like language and editing and stuff like that to actually ever publish it, which made me a little sad because like I was pretty proud of the world I had built for that book series, and like the few people I had talked to about it, they're like, oh yeah, like I would read this if it was like polished up essentially.
Hmm.
So I kind of wanted to get into a setting where I could put a world in front of people and like have them explore that world, and that kind of just I was like, well, why not D&D, right? Like that was like at the time, and it still is obviously one of the biggest ones. So and I was like, well, I played a little bit back in high school, so I'm familiar with 4E and a little bit of 5E. So it kind of just naturally led into me doing that, and then just immediately just ignored the actual world and lore that they had, and just created my own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. 4E is kind of difficult to create
Man, yeah.
content for, actually.
I don't even remember too much about 4E. What made it so difficult to create like content for?
Well, because it has the classes are very like regimented in how they get their powers and stuff.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
To create like a new like full class, like for 3.5 or 5th edition, you can kind of do that just right off the bat. Like maybe it borrows a few features from other classes, but
Right.
it'll feel different.
Mm,
But for 4th edition, because you need a set of powers for each level, you're not just designing a class and like initial abilities and ability choices, you're also coming up with powers, and you need to come up with, I mean, there's 30 levels, and
right. It's a lot.
and then you have, and the standard was to have at least 4 choices at each level, so you're coming up with 120 powers.
Oh yeah, you're starting to give me flashbacks now. Like whenever that was, like 12 to 15 years ago when we played that. Oh my gosh. I just remember getting so overwhelmed with 4E. I think 4E was like the first actual system that I saw, and I just looked at it and my eyes almost rolled into the back of my head.
It's a well put together system for balance, and I think it's actually very easy to DM as well. But yeah, the
Mm,
creating your own like class is almost, it's just too much work. That's why I think like it
yeah.
didn't get a lot of attention that way.
I mean, I think as high schoolers, it kind of was like a lot. Like, I'm pretty sure if I went back and looked at it today with like all my new knowledge, I could probably easily swallow 4E for the most part. But as high schoolers, when you have people that want to change systems every week, it's really hard to like actually learn something that that size and scale.
Yeah, yeah, definitely compared to some other systems, it's yeah much
Yeah.
more defined, and like you have to do it this way or else it doesn't, like you'll have problems.
Yeah, and I think like wasn't 4E supposed to also release with like a an online system alongside of it, almost like a virtual tabletop to help it, because I think it's more crunchy, but they never got around to like properly building that out. So that's kind of like
Yeah,
something.
yeah, I have heard that as well. I believe the designer for that died, so they ended up not having it.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. Um, the book series that you mentioned, what did you end up doing anything with that, or is it still sitting on a hard drive somewhere?
Yeah, it's just sitting in a Google Doc. I think it's one of those things that one day I might kind of circle back to. Like, if, like, Ethereal is a project that we've put all of our time and effort into for the past 2 years, so I haven't really thought about it too much in a while, but I still think it has, like, kind of some interesting ideas there that I would like to explore in some space. I don't know if it's, like, publish the books one day or kind of revisit it in another form of media, but it's still there.
Okay. Yeah. There's always like that Amazon self-publishing thing you
Yeah,
could
I
do.
think the issue comes down to more like the editing and like the pacing and stuff like that. I like to write, but I'm not a big reader myself. Like, so I'm not even gonna pretend that I know how to do a proper like storyline layout. Doing stuff like D&D and DMing for different games has helped because I think it's a very different type of storytelling, but
Yeah.
like it's helped figure out like plot lines and how to create interesting points, but I'm not even gonna pretend that if I published that book that I'd be like, oh yeah, this is great. Like I think the ideas are solid. Like and everybody I've talked to about the ideas, like really quickly, the concept was basically sci-fi superhero, but more of a grim tone where every superpower had like a downside to it.
Mhm.
But that's like, and that's something that's always just played through. Even like when I design stuff, I really like the idea of like a risk reward system. So I think that's always something that's existed in everything I've created. But I just don't think the book series would probably work as an actual book series. I think people would read it and be like, all right, there's no real drama or tension here.
Did you ever read Worm?
Worm. It doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, okay. It's
What is it?
it was I mean, fan fiction's not the right word. Web fiction. It was released on the web. It's a superhero story.
Hmm. Maybe I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's highly recommended. I probably should not actually recommend it. I didn't actually enjoy it very much when I tried it. Um, but just from this idea of like self-publishing a superhero story,
Yeah.
and having to do world building to have it make sense and have
Yeah.
characters that face interesting conflicts.
Okay, I'll give that a go if my mind ever turns back to that project.
Yeah, it's about this girl that develops superpowers, and she has to sort of hide them from her single father dad that's depressed, and
Hmm.
she wants to. She isn't quite sure what she wants, I guess, is the initial
Okay.
conflict. Like, she's handed this power, and
Yeah.
do you even do anything with it?
Yeah. Always a fun question.
Well, yeah, the game that you're designing is called Ethereal, and that's kind of the setting as well. So I think we should talk about the setting and then get into the system as it's being built up,
Yeah.
which I know isn't final form yet.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about what the setting is? Like, it's sort of a monster hunting
Yep.
organization overlaid on the real world like 100 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So it takes part in about, or like we recommend people to run it between 1890 and 1910, but honestly, if they want to do a more modern day, people definitely can. At its core, the idea is that the players take on a agent of the Beacon. The Beacon being this secret government agency that goes out into the world and protects the people unknowingly from cryptid threats. So in our world, things like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, aliens, basically any cryptid you can think of, and then some of our own design also, they're real, but they're not as common as like an everyday animal essentially. So they exist, and the Beacon's main goal is to make sure that people don't ever really get to experience them, or those that do we have mechanics in place to create cover-up stories. So the idea here is that the player gets to go out into this world. They'll hear about a potential threat in a town or a city, and they kind of have to go out, find this threat, neutralize it, and make sure that the greater public is not aware of it.
It's like the Men in Black.
Yeah, so yeah, very Men in Black, with a little SCP inspiration there. We've taken some
Hmm.
inspiration from this great web series called The Mandela Catalog. Definitely recommend anybody that hasn't seen it or heard it, definitely check it out. It's a really, really interesting web series. Um, and we kind of just really like this idea where it's like in this world, people still have those conspiracy theories about Bigfoot and aliens. Like, it's not like that those conspiracy theories don't exist. It's just that they're right. They actually don't realize that how right they are, right? And then the players can, and if the GM wants to even create interesting like lore where it's like, oh, maybe this conspiracy theory about Bigfoot is like they're the ones that planted that original seed essentially, but just to make other people fall off the trail of it, kind of thing.
Or like everyone that sees an alien, the beacon comes along and like gives them a full dose of alcohol or something, so that when man, you're
Yeah.
drunk off your ass, we don't believe
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. And that's we've actually created mechanics to like encourage players to create those cover-up stories and those conspiracy theories. We had like one where the players had to go into the sewers of New York City and fight a sewer gator. And I can't remember the exact cover-up story when they came back up, but when they did, they're like, "Oh, it's just construction, guys. Like, don't worry about it. We're just doing some construction down there." And like one of the NPCs was like, "I heard like these loud like bangs and growling and stuff like that." They're like, what's this guy talking about? Anybody else just think that he's wrong, and they just convinced everybody else around him that this like NPC was just like lying essentially through their teeth. It's really fun to see the players try to come up with like what would a sewer gator cover up story be? What would a Bigfoot cover up story look like?
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
One of the things I was curious about when I was reading through the notes that you sent me is why name it Ethereal over naming it Beacon?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We had the name Beacon kind of going back and forth between do we call it Ethereal, do we call it the Beacon? And we kind of landed more on Ethereal because we wanted to have the focus be more on the cryptid side of things. Like the agency is a big part, don't get me wrong. Like most mysteries start with you being at the beacon, and then the back end is you going back to the beacon and kind of reporting in. But when I said Beacon as the title, a few people asked me initially, is it like more superhero? I think some people kind of connected the name Beacon more to like a superhero agency for some reason, which I
The
don't
Batman
personally.
symbol, like up in the sky.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then like I don't know, Ethereal also to us read more mystery. It comes off more as ominous, unknown, which is the element that we want to highlight. But honestly, I think if we didn't go with Ethereal, like I think We have like three other names. I think Beacon is like at the top of those other names.
Okay, so it's still not set in stone yet because you haven't printed anything, I
We haven't
suppose.
printed. It's technically not in stone. We all call it Ethereal, and I think we're all like, as long as there's no issues with print calling it Ethereal that we're aware of, which we've done our research and we haven't seen any issues. I'm pretty sure we're going to be sticking with Ethereal.
Okay.
That's how we've marketed it, but you never know. Legal stuff's always interesting.
Yeah, be a trademark issue, I suppose, if something did come up.
Yeah, but fingers crossed. I don't think we'll have any issues, but
Yeah,
yeah, it was just like at the end of the day, it sounded more cryptic almost.
yeah, definitely. It does evoke that. You're right. Beacon maybe doesn't evoke the setting as much as Ethereal does.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're in 1900s Earth, and I'm assuming we're around the like that century point.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that like the technology level within this setting is higher than what we might expect from just the 1900s because hey, we got to give all the heroes their cool gadgets, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, you're on the nose with that one. So we're if even if you're in the 1900s, we're saying that technology is probably about 10 to 15 years more advanced than what we were really in society. And that's because the Beacon on the back end, they're an unknown society, but they're still developing technology to, as you said, kind of help fight these things. And then obviously those advancements into technology kind of just bleed into everyday life. So we have things similar to like the Polaroid camera, I think came out closer to 1920 roughly. But we have things like an instant photo camera because first of all, it's cool. It's something that people associate with like trying to solve mysteries, having those little Polaroid photos come out,
Uh-huh.
and it kind of makes sense that their technology would be more advanced in this world that has magic. It has come along further way because they need to develop ways to fight back against these entities.
That means there's probably already planes too.
That's something we're actually still trying to figure out how far technology has advanced on, to be honest, and like where it has. We obviously cars for sure. We haven't fully decided if we want aerial travel, and that's because we want players to be able to go to other parts of the world, but we haven't fully decided if we want there to be like that sort of that far of development really. But that's one thing we're still talking about lore wise.
Well, I think planes at this point wouldn't be capable of doing longer distances than a train, really.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
I don't know. I was more thinking something along the lines of like the Wright brothers being like
Ah,
Beacon members or something.
oh yeah, that would be cool actually. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that like I'm leaning towards yes, I would not mind at all us saying like, oh, there's very basic planes. But the other two people I work with, we haven't fully landed on like how far has the technology advanced really. But I agree with you. I think it wouldn't be out of the question that there could be planes.
In the Beacon organization, is that like state sponsored? Does the government know about it?
Yeah, so the idea of, I guess, like, quick little lore dump is that the government was always aware that these things like Bigfoot existed. Most governments, and when I say government, I'm going to say like as a whole across the world. Essentially, consider most governments at this time were aware that these kind of entities existed. They didn't ever really interact before because the threats were very few and far between, and people kind of did enough conspiracy theories on their own that they kind of just most people didn't believe them. But then the tipping point for us was in 1896, there was a circus in the US that claimed that they had captured a Bigfoot. And people at first were expecting a guy in a monkey costume, basically, right?
Mhm.
It turned out they did actually manage to capture this Bigfoot. And because of all the chaos and of this circus, the Bigfoot got enraged, broke free, and a bunch of people unfortunately died. And that's when it was kind of that tipping point where the government realized that they needed to kind of step in because as society grew and expanded, these entities that usually kept themselves in the darkness and kept themselves back, they're starting to get more aggressive. They're starting to kind of come to the forefront as the human race spreads out more in the world. And that was kind of the tipping point where a small coalition of governments, we're still trying to lock down exactly which governments across the world were involved with this, but definitely like North America was one of them, realized that they needed a force to kind of fight back. And that if the human race discovered that these ethereals were real, chaos would ensue and you'd have more instances like the circus. So it kind of became this thing of multiple governments across the world creating the beacon. So the governments are aware of it, but it's only like select people within the government are even aware of it. So they
Oh yeah,
tried
of
to keep
course.
it as tight and secure as possible, and only the best of the best are hired at these beacons. Like these agencies are like some are hidden in plain sight. Like it looks like it's a bank on the outside, but in reality, it's this like government agency that was set up, and they're not really large in numbers too. Like you have maybe like somewhere between 30 to 50 people per beacon. They try to keep it as small and tight as possible. That being said, we have in our lore, we don't have an official name for it, but other governments that aren't part of this coalition of having these beacons, they have their own forms also. So like obviously you have like more of the at that time you have the more rival countries and stuff like that. They have their own versions of the beacon. They're trying to do their own research on these entities, how they can either weaponize them or how they can like conspire and use them or just like everyone else.
Uh,
Also keep their own people safe too, obviously.
yeah. So you could do like an Indiana Jones style adventure where they have to like race against the
Yeah.
Kaiser to capture a dragon before he gets to use it in the coming World War One or something.
Exactly, or you could have things similar to like one thing that Stranger Things was also a an inspiration for us too. So you could also have things where it's like in Stranger Things, obviously the Russians doing like work right inside North America and stuff like that. So you can have something similar to that where they're trying to experiment right under the nose of the government on an entity that was found, who knows, Michigan or in Toronto or something like that.
Have you read the Vasen system?
Yep, I have a book of it right next to me here.
All right, all right,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, anyone who's read that system would be noticing the similarities there, but clearly not quite
yeah.
the same thing because Vasen has this sort of like much more mystical component for how the cryptids are interacting with the real world with like the site and stuff.
Yes, yes. That was something I really like about it. I really like their like the Nordic elements that they really like tapped into, and I find Vastin seems to be a little bit more magnified on like more of a very specific part of the world. Is kind of like how I read it. I haven't read the system in a while, but that's kind of what I recall. It was very focused more on like Nordic lore, if I'm not mistaken.
It is definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, like that seems like even within your own world, you could say, yeah, Vasen is still true. That's just how Scandinavian monsters work.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you take any like more mechanical inspiration from Vasen for Ethereal system? I don't want to get into the system fully yet. I'm just curious about
Yeah,
that.
no. We actually wrote Ethereal before we tapped into reading Vasen. I wanted to kind of design our system without looking at like Vasen or Monster of the Week.
Hmm.
And then I kind of picked it up afterwards. I would say comparison between the two is we're more mechanical heavy than Vasen.
Hmm. Okay.
But I really like the stuff that they did, but I think we've done stuff for the most part different.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be surprised if those concepts were the same. Like it just seems too different, really, just from the way you've described it.
Yeah.
Just curious. What what systems do you think you did use more for like research and inspiration?
So when we started, 5e, since that was the system I was most familiar with, was what Ethereal was originally built off of. But that being said, it is so different now, to the point where you can't even recognize the elements that we kind of borrowed from 5e to build the foundation. To the point where the foundation has completely been ripped out and replaced with brand new stuff. And then after we kind of finally looked at other systems, I will say a lot of inspiration came more from looking at multiple places. So took a little bit of inspiration from things they did in Monster of the Week, Vason, Peter from Tales from Elsewhere kind of looked at what he did and took a little bit of inspiration where he moved away from like a hit point system and did like a wound system. Our
Hmm.
wound system's nothing like his system at all, but kind of encouraged us to move away from like hit point pools and stuff like that.
Uh-huh. Did you do anything from Gumshoe? Because I'm noticing some components here. They seem similar to some Gumshoe systems.
No, I actually I'm not really familiar with Gumshoe, to be honest.
Okay. It's a pretty different style, so I'm not sure it would actually be useful for you to read at this point, to be honest.
I mean, I'm always open to like checking out what other people have done. I'm somebody that's like I like to design my own thing in my own little vacuum, and then one of the other developers, Thomas, he is very familiar with a wide array of systems. And then I kind of run stuff through him, and then he'll either point out things like, "Oh, this is kind of similar to this one system," or he'll be like, "Oh, we should probably adjust it because another system tried doing this, they weren't super happy with it or something like that." So I have like a really good like ear to the ground without me myself getting too influenced because I don't think there's anything wrong with influence, but I guess it's like a personal thing where I'm like, oh, but then I feel like I've stolen something, and I know that's not how that works. Like at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a real unique idea anymore these days. But I, for me personally, I don't want to ever feel like, oh man, I took something that wasn't mine. I'd rather create it and then mold it a little bit
Hmm.
more. If that
No,
makes sense.
I definitely get that. You want to have this be your own work and not uh, a carbon copy of someone else's thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And for my own game designing journey, I was looking for something that was like a Chinese RPG, and I was like, oh, well, if I don't find something that I like, then I'll make my own. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I found something that I like, and then it was like, okay, well, there's the product that I would design, so I'm done.
Yeah, and that's kind of where also Ethereal kind of came from was I wanted to do a cryptid hunting game, and again, Vesson and Monster of the Week are great systems, but what I found with them that I personally wasn't a huge fan of was that they were very narrative driven, and they were more rules light is what I found. And again, it's
Mhm.
been a while since I read Vesson, so I might be misremembering a bit, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of heavy focus on being tactical in combat. I wanted a game that was tactical in combat, but you could also take stuff that you learned outside of combat and use that as the tactics in combat, right? And again, it won't get too far into the system at this very second, but that was something I couldn't quite find on the market, and that's sort of where we started when we built Ethereal from the ground up was making sure that there was a lot of focus on strategy and
Mhm.
teamwork.
Yeah, no, I think that's a accurate presentation of Vassen
Yeah.
for sure.
The Art of Vassen, though, man, that book, like sometimes I'll literally just grab the Vassen book just to flip through and look at the art because it just blows my mind how fantastic it
Yeah,
is.
that's really good stuff. Okay, back to Ethereal as the setting.
Yeah.
Well, sort of staying on the inspiration point here, I guess. The Beacon organization that you described to me seemed very similar to the sort of the monster hunting organization in the Van Helsing movie. Have you watched
Oh,
that movie?
I have seen it, but I actually didn't make that connection until you said it right now, and I was like, yeah, actually, yeah, no, that's a pretty good representation.
Yeah, because there's that one point where they go to the Vatican, and then you can see like when Van Helsing's getting all his gear there, that there's like Buddhist monks and
Yeah.
like Islam imams in the background that are all working on their own things, and it's clear that this is like an international and interfaith organization that is in charge of like monster hunting and keeping monsters secret from the public.
Yeah. Huh. I actually have never really made that connection to you said, but yeah, that's accurate. The original space that we were designed from is, are you familiar with the game Control?
I am not.
It's this really good game that's made by the same people that did Alan Wake. It's people that made Alan Wake made Control. And the
Mhm.
idea of Control is very SCP inspired also. And when I first played Control, it literally starts with you walking into this giant building that looks like a bank, but then when you get past the teller counter and you get past an elevator, you realize there's so much more going on there. And that was something that like really when I saw that setting, I was like, oh, I love this. Like I love this idea of a building that's in plain sight, people walk by every day, not realizing what's really going behind those doors. And we kind of that was kind of what we based the initial very first idea of a beacon behind. And then we had the SCP, obvious, like anybody that even looks at our system, I think will see that. And we kind of took the idea that the beacon has these three core elements or principles. You have the learn, which is self-explanatory, gaining knowledge about the entities. You have protect, which is about keeping the public safe, and then you have obscure, which is making sure that people aren't aware. So we kind of took those elements of like control of this awesome like hidden space, and then you took some of the elements of SCP of like trying to protect the public, kind of mix them together. But kind of bring it back to what you were saying, like yeah, like stuff like Van Helsing, I guess, is a very good idea also for people of like what the beacon's supposed to look like and represent.
Um, You keep mentioning SCP here, and I'm aware of what that is, but I feel like that's maybe a little esoteric for some of the
Oh
people
yeah,
listening. Can you describe that?
yeah, SCP, and I will say I'm not the biggest like SCP guy, so I'm probably not going to get do as much justice as it deserves. But it's kind of a collection of um, monsters and entities that have been created by a array of people online, of a lot of like creepypasta stuff kind of built into there. And my understanding of how the SCP works is that it is a also a government agency that kind of gets involved with these creatures, kind of locks them down. And you can like, I think there's a site dedicated to it now where each of them have like these little mini stories attached to them of like usually like some sort of twist. But the idea is that each of these creatures have been locked up into containment, and it'll talk about like these different entities, and the government is essentially locking them up, or trying to capture them as well.
Well, I think like the false Hydra story is one that's more popular with D&D folks of what a SCP monster would kind of be like,
Yes,
where it's a
yes,
monster that while it's singing, you don't know it's there, and when it eats people, you forget that they ever existed. Um,
best creature.
yeah,
Best creature. I ran that for my one in person group, and they afterwards were just completely just like sitting there when the session ended, just looked wiped in the best way possible. I ended our false Hydra story actually with like I read this great recommendation on Reddit where they find a letter in their backpack afterwards. It basically describes a character that was with them the entire journey, being like, "Oh, remember when we did this? Remember we did this? Can't wait to go on the next adventure with you." Signed, I think we called him Raymond, and they're like, "Who's Raymond?" I'm like, "Raymond, obviously." And it's like just implying that they had somebody with them from the beginning that they lost during the false Hydra fight. Like,
yeah. I think that is a very standard way of
yeah,
you know yeah, needling your players a little bit with the
yeah,
false Hydra story of creating a fake party
yeah.
member that's dead.
I love it. I love it so much. It's such a great design for a creature.
It's very difficult to run too, so good job
Right.
on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, no, that was I was wiped afterwards after that too. Like trying to track everything, and then just like the players just like looking at you like when they say, "Oh, I want to go talk to the barmaid." You're like, "Who?" And they're like, "Obviously her. I just talked to her." I'm like, "I don't know who you're talking about." And they're just like, "All right, what's happening with our DM right now?"
Yes, it is very much more of a like sort of DM versus player story than like setting versus player in some ways.
Yeah. I've always wanted to run it again, but it's one of those things like once a player knows about it, it kind of loses the magic.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, me talking about it here is a mistake because then people will hear about it while listening to the podcast. Um, so one of the things I was curious about for the ethereal setting is magic within the setting.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm assuming there is magic. They're like within all these cryptids. Maybe there's like fairies in Ireland and they have magic. So magic exists in some way. Are
Yes.
there like witches and wizards that can use magic?
Yeah, so magic's something that we've kind of had a struggle with from the beginning, trying to make sure that magic exists 100%, but we didn't want it to feel like fantasy magic. So there are four classes of magic currently. You have Divine, Forsaken, Transmutation, and then the last one's called Tekana, which is mix of technology and arcana essentially. And what we've kind of landed on is how magic works in this world is it's very physical and component based. You find something that's able to store your magic. Say river stones are good for holy magic or divine magic rather, and you infuse it with a little bit of magical energy. Not everybody's able to tap into this magical energy that exists in this world, but those that do, it's usually very minor effects. Like they maybe heal a little bit faster, or nature seems to favor them a little bit more,
Okay.
but most people can't tap into magic at all. It's a forgotten thing of the long gone past. But yes, things like ethereal entities, they absolutely have that connection to magic. So you have fairies, you have gnomes, you have hags that are able to use this power for themselves.
Okay. So magic exists, but it's very like esoteric and restricted from the players kind of.
Yeah, so like players can pick. So we have instead of classes, we have divisions. And there are divisions that tap into. There's one division for each class of magic. You have the occultist, you have the ecclesiastic, you have the accursed, and then you have the engineer. Engineers use the Tectona magic.
Uh-huh.
So they can absolutely play a spellcaster, but they're not. It's not like in D&D where you're going to go out into the world and you're going to see like a wizard in a castle, or people are on the street are just going to be casting magic and using spells. To the greater public, magic is like an ethereal entity. They don't know that it really exists, or the people that they've heard using magic, they think it's just a sleight of hand trick, or it's just a luck of the draw. It's just a miracle, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was another portion I was curious about because like a lot of religions have magical rituals.
Yeah.
Like the going back to the Van Helsing movie, the blessing of holy water and then using it against vampires is one that appears pretty often within role-playing fiction.
hmm
Is that a component of what you have going on within Ethereal?
Like from the sense of like how magic ties into religion.
Yes. Like, so does the Catholic Church have a holy water spell that actually works? It's kind
Right,
of
yeah,
what I'm
no, so
going at.
that's fair. And that's something we've wanted to be very like careful about, like how we tackle religion in a real world setting that's just been altered a bit.
Hmm.
So how we've approached it is that when you have like divine and forsaken magic, anything that the regular public, and that includes people, let's just say from the Catholic Church, even those that are higher up in the Catholic Church, they see miracles happen. They see these things happen that have been declared as miracles over time. That's really most likely divine magic at play. They might not understand that's divine magic, but that's kind of like what it boils down to. Or when they see blights, plagues, anything that comes off more as a curse, that would be forsaken magic in play. Now, and we're not here to tell anybody that's like, oh, this is a to overcome someone's beliefs, or to tell them that this is how religion works. But in the world of ethereal, how it kind of boils down is that if you have like the ecclesiastic division, which is the like your clergy, your prophet, they they see forsaken and divine magic as a gift that has been given by a greater force. So they see their divine magic as, I understand magic exists, but this has been gifted to be by a greater power. Forsaken magic has been sort of like a sin or a blight that's been tricked into our plane of existence by a evil force.
Okay.
But then we have on the other end of the spectrum, like in real life, you have people that try to explain things in another way. So if you look at the engineer division, they see magic, all four classes of magic, as building blocks of the world. They don't think that Forsaken or Divine Magic has been gifted to us by anyone. They just think it's part of the general structure. And we, as the writers, aren't telling players one way or the other. If you want to create an ecclesiastic that sees the world as, yes, magic has been gifted to us by this greater power, that's why these blessings and these miracles happen, go for it. If you want to create an engineer that doesn't believe that kind of thing, go for it. We're not gonna say as writers which one is accurate, because at the end of the day, we're all about cooperative storytelling, and we want people to tell the story that they want to tell. We're not
Mhm.
here to tell people if they're right or wrong on what they want to write, essentially.
Okay. So we have like that the Catholic Church has a spell that creates holy water, but it is not necessarily originating from a divine source. It's just there's a spell they know, and we're not going to tell you how it actually works.
Yeah, and it's not even, they probably don't even see it as a like a spell in the typical sense of like they know they're doing magic. They create their holy water as the Catholic Church in their typical way that they would make it. I'm not like religious, so I'm not going to even like pretend I know how that sort of thing works, but they would create the holy water, and if it's compared to our real life in ethereal, they don't realize it, but they're probably casting a spell, but they don't connect it back to magic. It's really only the people within the beacon that realize what magic really is, if that makes sense.
I think that's actually a common distinction that is made within the church, that the rituals the church is performing are not magic. Instead, they are miracles, which is kind of separate, and that
Mm,
within this more like fantasy version of it, magic is the devil, whereas miracles are God.
yeah,
That distinction.
yeah, and that helps, and that's like it. It's like divine. I'm saying air quotes here. Divine magic in ethereal is often seen in the everyday public use as a miracle. They don't realize it is that distinction essentially. But
Mhm.
the beacon, people of the beacon do realize like, oh, this miracle happened, this person's life was saved. It was likely the cause of divine magic.
Okay, gotcha. Um, Another thing I was curious about within Ethereal is there's often this idea within fantasy settings that take place in the modern world that magic used to be more commonplace, like a long time ago,
Yeah.
because people didn't need to hide it as much. It was more accepted to have magic be around and all that stuff. And that in the modern world, you either need to hide or magic has gotten weaker over time due to something. Often the encroaching of civilization is one of those components that you mentioned earlier with like the Bigfoot escape thing.
Yep.
So which would you say is your presentation? Is it more like magic is getting weaker or magic needs to hide from modern civilization?
I'd say it's probably more that as civilization has evolved, it's the way these rituals and these practices used to go has kind of fallen to the wayside for more, I'm going to say practical and more modern takes, which is why you have less magical people, why ethereal entities are more present, because perhaps there was a time where a ritual or a sacrifice was made towards one of these entities that is no longer happening. So it's more like these practices have fallen out of, well, practice, and that's kind of the reason why this thing doesn't exist. Magic can still be as powerful as it used to be. It's just you don't really have those teachers or those learnings, which is part of the job of the beacon too, is kind of bring these practices back to specific people to put the power in those that they need to kind of course correct.
So the beacon has to do like whatever sacrifice to keep the dragon satisfied now.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
I mean, if that's where the mystery goes with the GM, right? Like that's the fun thing is that if the GM sees that, let's just say there's a spirit haunting a town, and the players go there and they want to uncover the mystery, there's always going to be a couple ways you could tackle these types of mysteries. Do you find out what was the reason why the spirit started attacking, and like, oh, we need to do this old ritual that used to take place to keep the spirit at bay? Or is it that we just need to find the weakness of this thing and just outright fight it? Or is there a way to just appease it in another way?
Yeah, yeah. I do want to talk about the monsters a lot, but another thing that I wanted to cover before that was the concept of other planes or dimensions,
Hmm.
because I think that's another thing that features in a couple different monster stories. Of like, I mean, we have the D&D conception of it, of like, there's the ethereal plane that ghosts go to, and
Right.
like demons go to the hell plane, and like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Is that concept brought into ethereal, or is everything more like grounded in, the physical universe?
Yeah, right now we're sticking more to the physical universe. It's something we've talked about, and the only reason why I've been a little hesitant to approach planar stuff is as I said, Magic's already a tough one to do in a more modern setting and not connect it back to like high fantasy. And I was kind of worried if you have like Magic and then you also start putting planar stuff in there, it starts bleeding that line a little bit more into fantasy than I really want Ethereal to be seen as.
Uh-huh.
But what we do touch a little bit more on is not planar, but space. So there obviously aliens are. I'm a huge like alien nerd. I love alien stuff. So it was very early on. I was like, I want to make sure that aliens exist in this world. So obviously, if you have aliens, they have to come from somewhere that isn't Earth. All other ethereal entities come from Earth. The idea is that they've always been here. They, as I said, they just have been more present recently in this lore. But aliens wouldn't make sense to have always been on Earth, except for if you're talking about ones that are like, oh, they're below the water. But for the most part, so that's kind of where we put that more outlandish stuff, is if it's an alien that has come from outer space, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not to say we might never touch that, because I think one interesting lore thing is kind of understanding like, okay, why are there some ghosts but not other ghosts? What kind of does that look like when a ghost leaves this plane, or where do devils and demons come from? Just at the moment, that might probably come in more of a future expansion or future breakdown of the game, because like right now I kind of want the lore to focus more on like, what does Earth look like?
Yeah. And I think like Harry Potter does the same thing, where there's tons of like different types of creatures, but they're all very physical and grounded. And there are ghosts, but we never really talk about like well, what happens when a ghost is like exorcised? Where do they go? That's not an answer
Yeah,
that's given.
exactly. They just bamf out kind of thing. And like, why is it that this one guy is a ghost, but this next person that passed on isn't a ghost kind of thing? And one thing I've always wanted to do with Ethereal's lore is I want to give people guidelines, but as somebody that comes from a place of like liking to world build, I want to very much let the players kind of use their own imagination and let the GMs kind of take it in the direction that they want. And that's not to say we're not giving them tools to understand the lore of Ethereal. Obviously, there needs to be guidelines, but I like to do the more nuanced, like for the more nuanced topics of like, oh, what happens when a ghost is exercised? That's something I want to let the GM kind of figure out, right? Like eventually we probably will put an official like this is how our way of doing it is, but I don't want to do that from the beginning. I kind of want GMs to kind of, you know, figure it out on their own. What do they think is? And then again, like I also want to play very careful with like tapping into other people's beliefs and followings and stuff like that. I'm not here to tell somebody like one way is right and one way is wrong, or you know,
Yeah.
it's a sensitive subject with people, the afterlife. So I want to treat it with respect.
I also feel like you don't even need to necessarily have a consistent answer.
Yeah,
Like it could work one way for one person and a different way for another person because, that person was Christian,
yeah,
worked for them, and this other person was Buddhist, so it worked that way for them.
exactly. And that allows players to also take it exactly if they follow one belief, they can let their characters follow that belief in game also.
Yeah. Yeah, like actual faith always has this complicated component for role-playing games of,
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're like if you're in a fantasy world, you can like obviously adapt it because it's like, well, we're using a different pantheon kind of thing, so you can be like a little bit more free of like how you speak to those kind of things. But when we're in a real life setting like Ethereal, you got to always be careful.
yeah. Well, yeah, I wanted to hear about all the different monsters. I'm
Yeah,
assuming there's more of like a Western focus on what you've been doing because that's you live in the Western world.
yeah.
You're speaking English. But let's start off with aliens. You mentioned them. Like, so how do they fit in?
Yeah, so aliens, we again, I'm a huge alien buff, so I kind of want to make sure that that's got a large spectrum of representation there. We'll definitely have things like the grays, the common one, the big black eyes and giant gray bulbous head. Those ones will be probably one of the more common ones I think people will gravitate towards because those are the ones people are familiar with. They have
Right.
like more telekinetic abilities and stuff like that. One of them has a really cool ability that basically will try to tap into your mind and show you the whole spectrum of understanding of the universe, and you have to do like a saving throw, but you want to actually fail the saving throw for once because if you succeed it means you actually understand everything they're showing at you and your mind kind of just crumbles at the weight of understanding the greater universe.
Mm,
So kind of just doing really fun teleconnect abilities like that. If we look back at like a lot of lore of like very early days and obviously looking back at the pyramids, there's a lot of people that kind of connect ancient gods back to aliens. Like there's a common theory out there that I think many people have heard of is that like the original gods were based off of actually visitors from other planets. So we have one alien that's kind of inspired by that idea is like kind of like what if this one following was based off of that called the Visitor, and it looks like a biblically accurate angel because that's always been an interesting idea to me. Is like, what if these biblically accurate angels were based off of an alien entity? So we have something like that. We have where I need to still create them, but there'll be stat blocks for like UFOs. So maybe there's like the players have to take down a UFO, which would be interesting with the technology at the time.
feels like it's almost impossible with the technology now.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think some of these things will be difficult fights, and that's kind of like one common thing though in Ethereal is that like you often do feel outgunned, but by doing the mystery and working through the mystery, you find weaknesses, you find ways to overcome it and take a fight that feels impossible normally and turn it into a manageable fight. So I don't know what a mystery of taking down a UFO would look like. I haven't gone that far into thinking, but like I'm sure there would probably be like hints at like trying to use electricity or something like that.
Well, I think like Nope had a good presentation of that story.
Oh yeah, I love Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do stuff like that. But yeah, like the alien section is one that we're still fleshing out the most, I think. But definitely gonna have a lot of different types of interesting alien entities out there. Take things like a common, like maybe I shouldn't say common. One theory about aliens is like the I think it's called the zoo theory, which is like, oh, we're just like under a microscope basically from aliens. So we have like one alien that's called like the zookeeper, which is them kind of like trying to keep the human race in a very specific state.
I think that's a fairly common idea, actually. I wouldn't say that. I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
it's so hard for me to tell like which ones are common or uncommon because like I follow that circle pretty closely. So sometimes like, oh yeah, this is common, and then I'll say that to someone. They're like, I've never heard this theory at all.
Well, yeah, but it's common within like the alien like
Right? Yeah,
community, right?
that's fair. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is a common one within the alien community. Yeah.
Yeah, outside of the alien community, it's like, well, there's grays, right? And
And then you have the red Martians. Yeah, lizard people.
I'm not even sure that's a common one anymore. That's kind of old
Mm,
at this point.
that's fair. Lizard people, I think, is still a common one.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't think those are necessarily like alien focused for how they're conceived of.
That's fair. We put lizard people as aliens in Ethereal, kind of throw them into that category.
Okay, well that's wrong, and you should be ashamed.
Yeah. All right.
Uh, okay, one other one we mentioned before, ghosts.
Yes.
So ghosts, the typical conception of a ghost is it's someone who their spirit doesn't feel satisfied with their life yet and wants to cling on to some part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Is that pretty much the way it works?
That's basically how it works. Like we're gonna have like I think we categorize them right now more as spirits. So that category hits like that ghost level, as you just said, somebody that's
Uh-huh.
unsatisfied. I think what we're gonna do, we're still working on a beast theory, but kind of have a couple different spirits that are based on different reasons why they're hanging back. As you said, one that's like unsatisfied because looking for revenge, one that's unsatisfied because they didn't fulfill something in life, and kind of create a couple of different stat blocks based on like different reasons as to why somebody would be held back to this plane.
Okay. And what about other types of undead, like zombies and vampires?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll touch vampires first. So one thing the beacon has is they categorize every ethereal entity as like a threat, one that's passive, one that's ingrained, and then one that's just like absolutely needs to be taken down immediately. And what they do with this ranking system is when they see a threat that they think is connected to a certain entity, they kind of decide, okay, do we get involved? So vampires are known as ingrained, which means that the beacon's more than aware of their existence, but because of how many there either are in the world or because of how well they can hide within society, they don't actively try to deal with them because it's just a unreasonable amount of resources you'd have to put into it. So unless there's like a vampire that's making a specific threat to something, they kind of just let them do their own thing. So the idea here is that vampires exist in this world, but because of how they exist and how they're able to blend in with society, they could be walking amongst the common folk essentially.
Okay, so vampires don't have the sunlight vulnerability because I feel
No,
like
so
that's
they don't. So no, so we have vampires currently in two flavors. So you have the ones that are like I don't have an official name for them yet, so we'll just call them one that's like lesser cursed and one that's like fully cursed. So the fully cursed one is your more typical vampire. So you have the weakness to sunlight, silver, kind of more that Van Helsing route as we were talking earlier.
mhm.
And then you have the lesser cursed one again, not the perfect name for it at all. Still figuring out the official title for this, which are the ones that aren't fully cursed. They're the ones that live throughout society more normally, but they occasionally still need have that thirst for blood, and still show those like early signs of a full fledged vampire.
Daywalker. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I guess Daywalker would be probably like an appropriate title for them.
okay.
Yeah.
And along those other like European monsters, I feel like werewolves are usually a pretty big one for
Yes.
modern mythology, liking a lot.
Yep. So very similar to vampires in that approach, where we have like two or three variations of them, where it's the ones that turn on a full moon. You have to have you have to have a werewolf that turns on the full moon, but then we also have other ones. Like so, how werewolves work is it's based on what the curse was that was put on them. So
Mhm.
some of them have full control over it. In fact, we have a division's one of their subclasses of the division is called the is basically lets you turn into a werewolf.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's one where it's like you can control when you turn in and out of it. and then you have the ones that turn on full moon, or there's ones that turn more like when they get angry. So we have werewolves are like based on where they got the curse from determines what type of lycanthrope they essentially are.
Okay. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that fits with a lot of different lore on it as well.
Yeah, that was one that was a tough one because I was like, man, I really like the idea of a werewolf turning only on moons, but like we wanted to have for the accursed division, we wanted to get somebody to be able to turn into one of to a werewolf. And obviously from a gameplay perspective, well, you can't wait for a full moon to use your main abilities. So we kind of went, let's just do a kind of wide array of things. And that's kind of like why also kind of ties back to folklore and tall tales and conspiracy theories is that like you hear all these different tales. Everyone has their own stories of about a werewolf. What if it's because they all have their own accuracies to them? There's a reason why some say it don't happen with a full moon. There's a reason why some say that they freely turn into these creatures, kind of. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good reasoning within the universe to keep it the way it is. Let's see, I mentioned demons before, and that
hmm.
feels like it's a bit different because our conception of demons is usually like more of a exterior force, and you meant you were trying to keep it more grounded.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So demons are categorized as demons in this world because of how they are perceived by the public, because of possible like religious ties they have back to them, or they're generally marked as demon if they are seen as more nefarious. So like back to that ranking system that the beacon has, most things that are ranked as demon are considered threats. They have a lot more like ill intent towards the public. They kind of go out of the way to harm folk and use a mixture of like either physical force or usually more like mental force.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of like demons and devils. We have a very wide range, and we were talking earlier about like more Western inspiration. We are across the board trying to bring a little bit of um, tales from across the world into Ethereal, and that's like in the demon section, we definitely want to make sure that there's representation across the board there. We've also created a few of our own, where it's like ones that like are ones that tap into dreams, ones that we have one that's called a false god, which is a demon that represents they come forth as a holy figure, be it a showing themselves as a god or even as just like as a priest or a holy man, and kind of gain their power off of followers and stuff like that.
Okay, kind of like Jasmine from Buffy.
Yeah. And then there's also that one. The main inspiration actually even came from the Mandela catalog, like I was saying earlier. That has like a lot of representations of like a false angel essentially, or Midnight Mass. Also, if you're familiar with that Netflix series.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. I didn't realize that was such a common idea. Okay, so demons are more classified by like a destructive tendency than they come from hell kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But then like because of how they're represented and seen, a lot of like religious beliefs has kind of built them off of like, oh, this came from hell, this came from another abyssal plane sort of thing. But they're more categorized based on like their hatred more towards humanity. Like probably if you were to put any classification, like a very broad stroke across any of the classification of entities, it'd probably be like, yeah, demons are the ones we that hate society the most, probably.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's broad strokes. Every entity is different. One thing we even put in the book is like understand that not every entity is here to harm people. It's like they're humans. They have their own goals. They have their own things that they trust and dislike. So don't look at every entity as a threat. Look at it more as like why is it here and what are its goals and what is it trying to do?
Oh, how egalitarian of you. Let's respect the monsters.
Yeah. But most of the time we're here in Ethereal to fight creatures, so go nuts.
Well, I think it's down to what type of campaign you want to run, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I've been focusing a lot on like sort of Western pop culture monsters, and I know there's obviously tons of other stuff that exists outside of that. And you mentioned wanting to bring that kind of stuff in. So do you
Yeah.
have like Oni and Yaogwai and other stuff like that you brought in from Eastern stories? And there's and Genie would be a Middle Eastern one, etc.
So we're still working on the bestiary. Those are things I have on my list of things I want to look at. I just want to be very careful whenever we take a creature from another culture that we're not appropriating it at all. Like even for North American ones, I've learned a lot about certain creatures that actually are like used a lot by current media, but they're not treated respectfully. So it's one of those things where we will be looking at like Oni and stuff like that and ensuring that we're doing justice and we're not just appropriating it. But I do want to tap into that. What we do is if there's instances where we see like, oh, this is something that's like really held with a lot of respect in a certain culture, we might not call the creature by that specific name and completely just like essentially copy and paste the lore, but we'll instead give nods to it instead and take inspiration for it.
Okay.
Like one example of that would be the Wendigo. So we learned that the Wendigo is a creature that's very commonly used in media these days. But what we've read and what we've talked to a few people from that from First Nations and culture that it's not respectively used and it's often seen as an insult of how the Wendigo is used and represented today. So we've instead of putting a Wendigo stat block, we've instead had a creature that has similar capabilities and has like similar aspects to it without actually making it a Wendigo and without actually disrespecting and appropriating that one creature. And instead, you can see the nods towards it without taking this thing that is seen as very close and important to them and using it for our own devices and using it for our own gain.
Yeah. And I feel like the presentation is really just sort of cannibal monster. There isn't anything else that's really consistent from what I've seen.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and it's one of those things, and that's not what we're here to do. We can easily make another cryptid that has obvious inspiration from it without disrespecting the origins of it. So, but to answer your original question, like we want to include that stuff, or at the very least include like where you can see like, oh, this obviously came from. I'm not saying the Oni is appropriate. I need to look into it still, but like let's just use the Oni as an example. I don't want somebody to be like, oh, well, this is wow, you use that really? I'd rather be like, oh, we can see that they use the Oni for inspiration here without directly using the original culture and taking advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are some creatures that we have currently used though from like other places. Like there's the British big cat, which I'd never heard of before I started doing Google research of it. So we have like something like that. So you do have things that are overseas from North America and represented, and that's part of it too. Is I kind of want to call out some cryptids that like exist that aren't very common. People have never heard of it before, and I would love people to go into the book and be like, "Wait, is this a real cryptid, or is this something that they just invented for the book?" And then they go into like a rabbit hole, being like, "Oh wow, the British big cat actually is a thing."
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was everything I wanted to say, ask about on the setting. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about it before we get into like the more of the system discussion?
Nothing like very particular. I guess the only other piece I'll really call out is that I mentioned earlier one of the types of spells is Tekana, which is technology and arcana. And I just thought that was like a really fun little piece we added in of like magic that takes modern society sort of thing and combines it with the old magic of old essentially. But what we've done is like obviously if you have something that taps into magic and machine, the question is like, okay, shouldn't technology be more than 10 to 15 years ahead? So the idea with our Tekana is that the magic is so unstable because it's not really meant to bring machine and magic together that it lasts for a few moments and then it kind of just falls apart. So it's kind of like man-made magic that is so unstable that like only engineers from the beacon really know how to use it, and even then it's like something that just like crumbles in front of them.
Have you played the Arcanum game? Your description was reminded me of that.
I've not.
Okay.
What is that?
It's an older video game that was set in a world where technology was starting to come around. So there's like trains and guns and stuff,
Okay.
but still magic and demons and other things like that. And it's sort of a mystery game. Like your character is involved in a Zeppelin crash, and you're entrusted with like this artifact by someone who dies during the crash, and you have to figure out like what they wanted you to do with it. Is the
Oh,
intention.
okay. That's cool.
It's an older video game though. I think it's like
Hmm.
20 years old at this point, so it's hard for me to recommend it now. Like you
Okay.
can get it on Steam. It has been remastered, but it still like is the gameplay is great. The graphics and have not aged well, but the gameplay and the storytelling is great.
I might take a look into that. Yeah, Takana had its inspiration coming from like Hex Tech from like League of Legends Arcane, and then also from like
Ah, okay.
we wanted some steampunk elements, but I didn't want it to be a steampunk world, so that's kind of like where we did a little bit of a dabble of steampunk is the Takana side.
Well, I think like naturally that era of human history is somewhat steampunk, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just didn't want to go full steampunk because I think a lot of people think of that time period. It's like steampunk is a setting that's been done a lot, and I didn't want that to kind of be the first vibe, but I still want to be there to be a nod towards that era, as you said, because that's a very common thing for that era.
Yeah. Anyways, the reason I brought up Arcanum was because its magic system had like magic and technology were like opposites that like repelled each other.
Oh,
So designing a character that could use both was actually quite difficult because the way the stats worked is you would receive penalties to technology if you were a magic user, and vice versa. If you were a technology user, you couldn't really cast spells.
well, that's cool. I like that. So is it like a full-fledged like RPG then, or was it more of like was that more like just an element of the game?
Um, what do you mean? I mean, yeah, it was an RPG video game.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if it was like if you were saying it was like an RPG or if it was more like kind of like BioShock, for example, where it has like RPG elements, but it's not like
No, no, it's more
design.
like a full RPG. You have like
Okay,
stats and stuff that you're upgrading as you level up. Yeah, yeah. I
well, that's
suppose
cool.
no, not an action RPG. It's more like Baldur's Gate.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So onto Ethereal as a system. So you said it's a class system, but we're calling them divisions instead of classes. Is that right?
Exactly. And then you have specialties as your subclass.
Okay. Why don't you walk me through like character generation?
Yeah, so basically how it works is that the players start by picking the division that they want to be in, division being like what your role is at the beacon, and then specialty being what does your character, well, specialize in. Right from the beginning, you have a choice between 8 divisions. So you can choose from the Archivist division, which is kind of like the people that are like the note keepers, the book nerds essentially of the beacon.
Right.
You have the accursed, which is I kind of talked about earlier. They have had some sort of curse put on them, and they can transform into a certain creature based on what the curse is. There's the detective, the ecclesiastic. You have the engineer, the hunter, the occultist, and then the trooper, which the trooper is kind of like your standard soldier. Once you pick your division, you pick your specialty, and then we have two types of levels in our game. We have a specialty level and qualification level. So specialty level is like what most people would be familiar with in any RPG really. As you level up, you get new abilities, new capabilities. And then we have our qualification level, which is basically every few levels you get to pick from this long list of qualifications. And qualifications are supposed to be things that like your character brags about on a resume or maybe just a weird quirk you have. And these qualifications usually come in tiers. So you'd have like the resilient qualification, where at level 1 it gives you a little bit of extra durability. Level 2 you can overcome saving throws, etc. And when you're picking qualifications, you can either go into one box and like go multiple levels and just pick like the highest bonus from that, or the closest thing we have to multi-classing in the game is that you can like put maybe 1 or 2 points in resilient, and then another point in the fearless qualification, then another point in the chef qualification. So you can either like really focus on one special qualification, or you can go more broad. And then in the character creation, also we do this thing with the leveling system for the specialties called what I like to call or boon and that's because at level 1 you get to choose between 1 or 2 abilities, which will usually define your character in one or more play style essentially. So if you're let's just say a fortress trooper, which is like more of our one of our tankier characters, at level 1 you might have a choice between an ability that lets you be more tanky or one that lets you do a little bit more melee damage. So then you can kind of decide, do I want to go more of that tank route, or do I want to be more of that brute doing like a berserker kind of play style. And then the following level where you get to pick a boon is there's going to be like a list of like 4 or 5 minor buffs, which is like, oh, more speed or you're more intimidating, which you then choose one of those. And then the following level is usually when you get a main stat increase, a qualification level increase, and then some characters get like another ability that helps their kit come online. So a lot of martial classes will get their extra attack at level 3. And then it kind of just rinses, repeats that format until max level of 11.
Okay. So you're starting off. You pick a division, which is sort of like your how you got into the ethereal agency,
Yeah.
and specialty is more like your specific skill set.
Yeah, Exactly. That's kind of like where it kind of defines your play style. Like division's a broad play style, then specialty's a very more narrowed in play style.
Okay. So I could have someone whose division is like doing the magic stuff within Ethereal, but
Yep.
then their specialty could be more like that bruiser kind of tank thing you were talking about, which we don't usually associate with magic users within
So
fantasy.
if there's a specialty that like kind of like plays into that, then yeah. So for example, like the ecclesiastic has three specialties you can choose from. You can choose clergy, crusader, or prophet. So if you were somebody that wanted to be a magic user that is more frontline, then you would pick like an ecclesiastic crusader.
Okay, so the specialties are restricted to like within your
Yeah.
division.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
that wasn't clear. Yeah. So the specialty is determined by the division that you pick.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So, for example, the accursed, all their specialties are based on what you turn into. So, the accursed can become a golem, a lycanthrope, one that we call the presence, which is like an outer body experience kind of form,
Okay.
or then we have a specter. So, if you want to be somebody that's a ghost, you can you could be a specter or cursed, and you can turn into a ghost essentially.
All right.
Yeah.
That's neat. Okay. So you pick a specialty, and then as you level up, you pick more abilities, like you said, until you get to level 11 or rank
Yeah.
11,
Yeah.
whatever we're calling
Yeah. Exactly.
it. Okay. Can you give like two or three cool abilities that you like?
Yeah. So I would say the archivist has a specialty called the scavenger, which is us saying, "What if you want to play Indiana Jones? You get a whip." And and there because like we needed to figure a reason to give the sorry, I'm going on a small tangent here. We had to give a reason why would the archivist, this bookkeeper, want to go out into the actual field, right? So we were like we picked one that's called the entityologist, which is one that specializes in a certain entity, and then the other one's the scavenger. The if you want to be an Indiana Jones type character, you absolutely can be here. So they have a whip. One of their abilities that I love is called convert. I think it's called converging drag, which essentially is you pick two entities. Entities are how we define characters essentially. So it could be a player or an enemy,
Uh-huh.
and you try to drag them together up to 15 feet. So if it's unwilling, they have to make a saving throw. If they are willing, they just move. So you can in theory move a player and an enemy closer together. You can move two enemies closer together. So it's just like this really fun ability where you just reposition people as how you see fit.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Um,
And that's getting
not
into that more tactical aspect you were talking about, because I can't imagine that would ever be a useful ability in like Bassin or something.
Yeah, positioning is really important in Ethereal. There's a lot of abilities and like the enemies that we can talk about more about later if you want. Is like they have a lot of things where it's like, oh, if people are like, there's a big difference between being 5 feet away and 10 feet away from something. Like it can make or break a fight essentially.
Okay.
Another one of the favorite abilities. This is one that like the playtesters we have had have loved this ability. So every division has one or two base abilities that no matter which specialty you pick, you get this ability just because you're a detective, for example.
Yeah.
So the detective has an ability called deduction, and this is such a fun thematic ability. When you're about to hit, when you make an attack and you're about to hit, you can declare hit or miss. And if you declare right, so if you say, "Oh, I'm attacking," I'm going to declare a hit. If you do hit and you declare correct, you get a bonus. If you could declare miss and you miss, you still get a bonus. And what that does is there's this great scene from the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movie where he's like breaking down how the fight's going to go in this brawl with this guy, right? And he's like going, "Oh, I'm going to move my arm up here. He's going to respond by this." And so what you get to do as a detective is you're about to attack something and you get to feel like you're actually a detective being like, "Ah, yes, I know this fist attack is going to hit him for sure." Or, "Oh no, he's not. I'm not going to hit. I'm going to definitely miss this one so I can reflect the blow," sort of thing. And it's just this really fun thing of the player sitting at the table being like, "I attack. This is gonna be a hit," and just like you feel like a detective when you're like declaring these sort of things.
That's cool. That's a really difficult like camera sequence to actually represent within RPG fiction, I think, and
Mm.
that's a neat way of doing it.
Yeah, it's always fun to see like the detective at the table just yelling hit or miss constantly, and the other players just looking at them like they're crazy.
I'm curious if there's like a gamish way to do that where it's like always good to say miss, because like if you hit, you're already getting something good that you want, you know?
Yeah, it's from a balance thing. I'm not gonna lie, it's one that we are still constantly adjusting because to your point, it's like, well, why would I not always just declare this? But I think it depends on the player because there's like some players that like, oh, I want to make this hit be the most powerful hit ever, and then there's other players like as you said where it's like, well, I'd get something either way then.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's difficult, and you also don't want to like force them to be like, well, you can only choose it one way, and then you have to choose it the other way next time, because then it's not really a prediction.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something we'll tweak, but I think like the base idea of just like, having this character that like can feel like they're Sherlock Holmes is just really, really fun.
I think it's cool that you're bringing in like bits of like fighting styles from fiction that people are familiar with for this. Like you mentioned the whip as well,
Yep.
and I'm also thinking for like the archivist, like in the Van Helsing movie again, there's the nerdy priest that comes along with him that's like, tossing in
Yeah.
holy water and telling him how to beat the monsters.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. The entityologist can do that too, if
Yeah.
they're fighting like specters.
The Giles character from Buffy is another one like that.
I'm not as familiar with Buffy.
Oh wow. Okay. This
Yeah,
is
like I
tons of
know some.
research for you to do there.
Oh, I know some Buffy. Like it's not like I'm completely unknown to Buffy. I don't know the specific characters off by heart though.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you're gonna say something else. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one other really fun ability is the detective. One specialty is called an inquisitor, so you're an interrogator. At base, they're about wanting to land crits, but they have this one ability that lets them literally interrogate the GM. So as the fight goes on, you basically gather what's just called a resource called evidence against an enemy. And then
Hmm.
on their turn, they can ask the GM based on how much evidence they've gathered a certain question. So the question starts off very basic, like, "Oh, does the enemy look happy, sad, or something like that?" Like start. But then as you go further down, like you can eventually, if you gather like 10 evidence against that creature, you can ask the GM like, "Who's he going to attack next, most likely?" And so it's just a really fun mechanic where you're literally interrogating the GM as an interrogator.
It feels like the Guess Who gang with like the board where you're flipping down
Yeah,
aces.
yeah, basically it is. Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
Thanks.
Oh, this is sounding really neat. Like this is kind of like a really fun system to play. Uh, I guess I'm curious for like character design because that's always another important part, and that seems like from what you described in your initial RPG stuff, where your group was just making characters basically. Um, is the character generation like fun and complex, or is it more like you're kind of just choosing a path and then going with that?
So we've tried to find this really fine balance where new players can step in and create a character fairly quickly, but at the same time give players that are long-term TTRPG players, or if let's just say, God, hope somebody plays Ethereal for 10 years straight, that they can still find stuff.
Hmm.
So what we've done is, like I said, you get like a bunch of choices as you level up. So we kind of start the character off with like a slew of abilities that sets the stage of like what their play style is. But then as you level up, you get more and more options to choose from. And then like the qualifications let you kind of adjust stuff. But what we've done is we've also made it, we're fully aware that some players don't want to sit there in a character builder for 45 minutes to an hour plus building a character and looking through options. So we've done like a lot of guides throughout. Like every division has a thing called a quick build, which literally says, "Hey, you want to make a level 1 character quickly? Take this, throw this into your inventory. Take this. There's your level 1 character."
Yeah, even D&D and Pathfinder, which are both very complex character generation, have had that.
Exactly, yeah. And then we've also done stuff for like the qualifications. I know people don't want to read through 30 qualifications each that have 4 levels. Like that's so hard to decide what do you want. So every qualification at the top has like a small little note like this qualification is for if you want more skill checks. This one is for magic users. This one helps you with focusing basically. And then spells, before every spell class there's a table that just lists all the spells and then just says this is what this spell is for. This is for this. It's like the most basic description.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the spells, there's also a quick pick guide where the player, if you don't want to read through 15 spells and pick 8, this quick guide literally just says take this, this, and this at each level, and it basically just chooses it for you. Because I know a lot of people don't want to read through all that stuff. So we've tried to find like a nice balance between players that want to put that extra time in and the players that just want to get playing. Because I know there's a lot of people like that, which I mean, totally fair.
Well, this is sounding like you're taking a lot of good tips on how to design good RPG books here, because I think that also just makes it easier to read for people because then they can, if they want to make something more complex, they have a place to start from.
Yeah,
They can be like, okay, why would I do this? And then they can go and read those abilities and be like, well, I want this a little bit, and then they can go find something like that in the broader like list like you mentioned.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess you could also, well, it's always difficult when you include stuff that's like inspired by other properties, and then someone says, I want to play Indiana Jones, and they could go like, go to the glossary and be like, where is Indiana Jones in the book? And then, but can you put Indiana Jones? Can you write that in the book?
Yeah, we put nods towards that at the very least. Like we make it very clear that you're using a whip, and I think we have an ability that says like belongs in a museum or something like that. So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we where we can, we put references towards the thing. Like for example, the Spectre or Cursed. I'm not gonna lie, that came from a desire of me. I'm a huge Danny Phantom fan. I grew up on Danny Phantom, and I
uh-huh.
wanted there to be an option to somebody to do that. So I was like, yeah, let's do that. And then we have a few abilities that definitely nod towards that character. So that if there's a fan out there, they can see it. They're like, oh, that's where the inspiration came from.
I'm always surprised how popular that show is. Like I didn't think of much of it when it was coming out, but
Yeah, I think it's one of those shows that aged well.
yeah, that's
No,
better than I ever thought it would.
that's fair. I mean, no, that's fair. I get it.
I mean, my impression was like, is this a Fairly Odd Parents like knockoff? Which it's absolutely not. It's just the animation style made me think, okay, what are we doing here? Where's Timmy?
No, that's a fair take for sure.
Yeah, it's a
The
childish
animation style,
take.
yeah, the animation style doesn't do it service. The actual storyline for a kids show was always surprisingly above what you would normally get as a kid for those types of shows. I found.
Hmm. Yeah, more on like the Avatar level for how like mature it gets.
Yeah.
I guess Teen Titans was also pretty mature. I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, those are like the three I definitely gravitated towards as a kid.
Okay. So we talked about character generation,
Yeah.
and I guess the other big thing for RPGs is combat. So how does combat work?
So, okay, so combat's a big part of Ethereal. We've broken out our game into two parts. You have the mystery that leads up to usually that big fight where you have to learn elements. And the reason I'm saying this is because the elements that you learn in the mystery are crucial for combat. You learn the enemy's weaknesses, you learn about possible abilities that they have, abilities that they might use to like steal resources away from you. So, when you lead into combat, generally the idea is that you don't ever want to just run into a fight and just start scrapping with it like you would in a lot of other systems. You want to make sure you've understood the creature beforehand. How we currently have it set up is that it uses an initiative system, so everybody rolls a d20. But the twist here is that the enemy has a set initiative. So we've tried to, in places, remove the need for the GM to track certain stuff. So the enemy automatically gets 2 turns per round. They get one at currently initiative round 5 and 15. So the players have opportunities to, in theory, go way before the creature, but if they do, then the creature gets 2 turns back to back, or they might get split up between the enemy, and that's probably the most ideal situation.
And every creature is this 5 and 15 structure?
Yeah, if we're gonna make it the same across the board, maybe the number 5 and 15 will change after a ton of playtesting, but for a while now, 5 and 15's felt pretty nice because 15 is high, but not so high that's unbeatable, and then 5's low, but like it's possible that you could still go
Yeah, I'm just
after.
imagining like a really fast monster where you like throw in another initiative on 25 or something.
Yeah, like I can see us maybe like having more unique creatures that have like a feature that they get like like as you said for the faster stuff going first. We haven't hit that yet in the bestiary, but I could definitely see something like that taking place. Like for the most part though, like I'd say like 90 to 95% of the creatures will probably always be that 5 and 15.
Gotcha.
And then a nice thing that we added is that players, since strategy is very crucial to combat in Ethereal, players after they roll initiative, they can swap turn order with each other if they're adjacent to each other. So if you have like that clergy that you want to go much later, like just to ensure if you take some damage in between, you can push them behind you if you're next to them in the turn order. So you basically can like arrange the turn order a little bit based on your preference.
Okay.
And then combat starts. So we use a system called to hit and to crit. So we don't use AC. Instead, you roll a d20, and every character has a 2 hit of 11 or a 2 crit of 22. So what this does is it basically means that you don't need to ask the player or the GM, does a 14 hit, does a 16 hit? No, you know in front of you, you need to roll a d20 and add your appropriate modifier. And if you have an 11 or higher, you hit. And if you roll a 22 or higher, you crit, which means in our system, you don't need to roll a natural 20 to crit. And that's because I've always felt it seems a little weird that like there's not a difference between rolling an 18 or rolling a 23 kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like you roll really high, but it's like that does the exact same as rolling an 18. It's just a hit.
Mhm.
So we wanted to make crit something where it feels rewarding to get a big number, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like Pathfinder had sort of an exception to that with like the get 10 more thing. But
Yeah.
often it feels like that is almost the same thing because to get 10 more than a difficulty, usually you have to be rolling a 20
Yeah, exactly.
or
And it's
close
like,
to it.
and crits feel nice, and it's not like you're going to be getting crits nonstop with a 22. Like mathematically, it gives you like I think it's like a 10% chance to crit. But we've also taken that into account. Crits aren't as powerful as they are in like other systems.
Mm-hmm. So that also seems to indicate that the monsters, like if you have a monster that has like really thick armor plating, it's still going to be easy to hit within that conception.
Yeah.
But it'll maybe be harder to hurt with a hit because it'll have like damage reduction or something.
Exactly. So what we've done is because we wanted it. First thing is if you're working for the Beacon of the Agent, you're supposed to be the best of the best. So for us, it never made sense for a player to consistently be like inconsistently being able to hit their target. It's like you know what you should be hitting. It goes faster. So that's why we did the 2 hit to crit. And then where the tankiness comes in is we didn't like these big pools of health. So every player character has 10 health. And as you take damage, you mark off one of these wounds. And if you ever hit 10, you fall unconscious. Creatures might have more than 10, but they're not going to be massive pools. Like it's usually 20 to 30 is like the highest a really big creature will have because we don't want the GM have to worry about like tracking a ton of health. But where tankiness comes into play is the armor and the division you have gives you a number of fortified wounds. So essentially, like imagine you're wearing light armor. This might give you fortification to 4 to 5 of your wounds. So basically, what you do on your character sheet is you color in like these little spaces, so you know you have 4 fortified wounds, right? And when you take damage and your current wound is fortified, so if you've taken no damage and you got some fortified wounds there, you get to reduce the damage based on the armor you wear. So that's where characters and enemies start to feel tankier because early on, when you haven't broken through this armor yet, you're reducing the damage. But then once you get enough damage off, all of a sudden you don't have these fortified wounds anymore. Your armor or the shell of this enemy isn't as powerful, it's not as durable, so then you don't get to reduce the damage, so that damage starts to amp up essentially, and you get a bit of a spiral effect.
Okay.
Yeah, if that makes sense. It's hard to show without like a diagram essentially, but I hope that kind of came across kind of what the thought is.
No, I get it. Like within the 4E conception, you have like a bloodied number, and when you get below the bloodied number, they lose their damage reduction, kind of.
Yeah, essentially that, yeah. And what we've done is light armor. The idea of light armor is it gives you less damage reduction, but you get more of those fortified wounds. And the concept there is that like the armor's lighter, so a fortified wound isn't necessarily how durable the armor is. It's kind of how effective you are with it. So light armor you can use longer because you're more agile with it, whereas heavy armor can soak up more damage early on, but it doesn't last as long because you start getting exhausted, so you can't use the armor as efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done is there's even moments where damage could be technically reduced to 0. Heavy armor is early on able to reduce damage to a point where unless you get hit by a crit or get hit by like a really powerful attack, you could probably reduce damage to 0 and just feel like a really tanky character just soaking up hits essentially.
That's cool.
Yeah. And the same for enemies too. Like one thing that I know some people are going to be like, wait, what? You're saying that I roll for damage and I hit 0 damage? Is that enemies can in theory have a strong enough like resistance to also reduce damage to 0. And that kind of goes back to the whole thing I was saying about you want to research your enemy beforehand. So for the enemies that are more resistant, they generally have a vulnerability to a certain type of coating. So this is where we have stuff like silver, garlic, special types of moss and stuff like that come into play where you want to learn beforehand that, oh, this enemy is vulnerable to garlic. So we better go find some before this fight and apply this coating to our weapon. And if you do, well, then you get extra damage on that enemy. Whereas if you didn't, you'd probably have to hope for a crit or get creative with stacking damage bonuses on with your teammates essentially.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well, so I'm glad you answered that question.
Yeah.
One other difficulty with that system that I'm thinking of is very fast monsters that are hard to hit.
Yep.
Like, I think I don't necessarily want to bring up the Wendigo as an example because of what you mentioned earlier, but
No, that's fair. Yeah.
within Supernatural's conception of the Wendigo, it's very fast, almost like that you can't see it move because it's just zooming around.
Yep.
And that seems like a creature that would be impossible to hit with a
Right.
normal hit, and you would have to crit it to actually touch it.
Yeah, exactly. And so like how we kind of hit that fantasy is like I was saying, like you need to find ways to boost your damage. You need to hit a crit. And that's part of the bonus of also having a 2 crit of like 22 rather than needing to hit a natural 20 is because then you can do things like adding extra onto your attack roll. Now it actually gives you a reason to want to add onto your attack roll rather than just increasing damage. There's like a benefit of doing more damage or better chance to crit. And then we also have we have a creature that is very fast. It's called the Contortionist. It's this like lean creature that's all about like breaking down its form, being able to contort itself, as the name suggests, and kind of dodge stuff. And then what we do with creatures like that is we give them first of all more movement speed on their turn, but then they also get bonuses where it's like you can move freely and players can't take attacks against you if you move away from them. You have the ability to make dexterity saving throws with advantage. You have it so that attacks against you have disadvantage at times and stuff like that. So we have other ways to also bake in like these speedy creatures to make them feel like they're really hard to hit and lock down unless you restrain them in some way.
And is this a D20 system? Because you mentioned like
Yes.
advantage, and the 22, I'm assuming, is only happening with a D20.
Yeah, yeah. No, D4 actually.
Oh
Yeah,
no!
so yeah, it's a D20 system, but for damage, what we recently did is we overhauled our entire like damage system. How damage works is it only uses D6s, but obviously rolling D6s with only 10 health, you would go through 10 health quickly. So what it does is basically you roll a number of hits on success. So let's just say it says 3 hits. So you would roll 3d6. And rather than adding up the total of these numbers, you instead, depending on what you roll on each of these d6, determines how much damage it does. So 2 to 5 counts as 1 damage. A 6 counts as 2 damage. Ones also count as 1 damage, but you always ignore the first one. So for example, if you roll like a 3, a 2, and a 1, the damage is 2 because you get 1 from 3, 1 from 2, and then 0 from the first one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've made it so that, like we've really just shrunk down what the damage pools are. So it's like you're working with 10 health essentially, and the damage you still get to roll a lot of dice because that was the big thing. Is like people like rolling their clickety clack math rocks, right? So we wanted to give people a chance to still roll a lot of dice without having these giant amounts of math. So really, what happens is you go, hey, I have 10 health. Oh, I rolled 3 damage. I get to reduce the damage by 1. Okay, I take 2 hits, 2 X's, and that's basically all the math you really need to do with Ethereal's combat, which is nice.
Okay. That is neat. And I'm guessing there's a way to program that within Roll20 that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a way.
We'll have to look into that. We haven't looked into any integration yet, but that's something on the list for sure.
I can think of how to do it within the API, which means you could probably do it with a custom character sheet.
Yeah, something definitely need to do eventually.
Oh, yeah, that's a later thing.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good overview of the combat system.
Yep.
Something I think I skipped that you mentioned before was like the investigation before like the climactic encounter.
Yes.
And are we still a D20 system for that component? How's that working?
Yeah, so there's a few mechanics there that we have for like solving a mystery. So right off the bat, we're in the team aware that writing a mystery is hard, but solving a mystery is even harder because you might represent a beacon agent, but obviously the player most likely is not a sleuth or a real detective. So the first mechanic we have is called momentum, which is whenever the player, when the GM thinks that the player has discovered a good clue or has created a good deduction or even has a good theory, they grant the entire team something called momentum. And then on your rests, you can expend momentum to get clues. So basically, if you feel like the trail's gone cold or you just really don't know where to go next because, I mean, again, we're not actual detectives, you can say to the GM, hey, I'm going to expend either 1 or 2 momentum. So one momentum is the GM will give you a clue for a person or a place essentially that you might have overlooked. So it might just be like, oh, throughout the mystery, the name Mary has came up a few times, and then the players might go, oh, right, we need to go talk to Mary, or oh, wasn't Mary a name we saw on a gravestone? Or they could give two momentum for a major clue, which is then the GM gives a more broad, like a broad like term slash mini story where they go, you recall throughout the mystery the term Mary came up on a gravestone, and the mayor also mentioned her. You might want to like look into that further. So what we've done is kind of created, and actually I should say, and narratively what this is kind of like all of your characters, your agents are sitting down and kind of pulling out all their papers, kind of coming together. That classic photo of like red yarn connecting multiple photos on a
Yeah.
cork board kind of thing. Well, narratively it makes sense. It also gives players a chance to not feel bad if they get stuck.
So this is different than the 2d20 momentum system, right?
Yes, I wasn't actually. I'm not even aware of what that is.
Okay. It didn't sound the same. I was just
Okay.
wanted to double
Yeah,
check.
yeah. But then outside that, to answer your original question, also is yes, there is the standard D20 skill checks. Also, if the player wants to do an investigation, you have these skill checks as well, where the GM might go, okay, make a investigation check, roll your D20, add your investigation.
Mhm.
But what we've also done there is because one thing that I've never fully liked is that you're supposed to be a sleuth, but then you roll crappy on your investigation. It's like, well, that's it. So every division gets to become what we call adept in a couple of skills of their choice, which is basically when you make a D20 roll with that particular skill, you have 3 adept tokens. If you don't like the roll, you can expend a token and then re-roll that particular skill. And you can do that multiple times for the same skill check until you find a roll you like. So that way, if you're supposed to be good at investigation and you roll crap, well, there you go. You can at least give it another shot up to 3 times. So it's kind of like inspiration, but built into the character sheet.
Gotcha. Okay. I mentioned the Gumshoe stuff before, and how it
Mhm.
handles investigations is you have like points. So say you have like a 3 in investigation, and what that means is that when you investigate like a crime scene, you spend an investigation point and you discover a clue.
Okay, yeah.
As long as like investigation would actually get you a clue. If it doesn't, then you don't spend the point. It's fine.
Okay, that's interesting. We had something like that in our original playtest, but what our players' feedback was they didn't feel like they were being active. We didn't have it directly like that, but they felt like they were just expending a resource. Like it was kind of like the momentum system, but they didn't do anything to earn it at the time. So
Mhm.
that so it didn't really quite fit in with like what we were going for. But that's yeah, that's interesting.
Well, like you said, you're making more of a tactical game, and
Yeah,
that's more of
yeah,
a, like a narrative focused style.
right. That's fair.
Um,
Yeah,
so I mean, it feels weird to say, yeah, that the out of combat stuff is tactical, but you've made it that way.
yeah, exactly.
What happens to the leftover momentum points once you're at the climax? Can you spend them at that point?
No. So what happens is they go. We have 3 rests. We have your minor rest and major rest, which is 30 minutes and 1 day or 6 hours respectively, and then we have a total rest, which is a 3 day break, which is generally meant to happen at the end. And so the idea is if you take a total rest, you've your mind is no longer able to connect those dots. You've taken too long of a break, and you lose all momentum essentially.
No, I meant like, okay, so I'm hunting the vampire down, and
Yeah.
I find some clues, and I have like 3 momentum. We
Yep.
spend 2 of them, and we discover, oh, the vampire's lair is at the castle.
Right.
So then we head to the castle right away because we don't want the vampire to kill again.
Yep.
So we've got 1 momentum left for our confrontation with the vampire.
Ah, yes. Yeah, so you would still have that momentum that you can just basically hold on to until the mystery is essentially finished. So if you like, maybe there's the GM gets the vampire to escape, or you find that you need to rest in between to try figuring out how to get past maybe a locked door that he has, and you need like some sort of clue to get through that locked door, then at least you have that 1 momentum for up until that encounter.
Okay, but I couldn't like use it in the combat to like deal the vampire
No,
an
yeah.
extra point of damage or
No,
something.
no, exactly. Momentum strictly for the narrative and the deduction part to help the people that aren't great at solving puzzles, essentially.
Okay, so I don't have any incentive to save it. I want to just spend it to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I should also note you can't use momentum to gain momentum. Like if you use momentum to figure out you need to go to the vampire's castle, going to the vampire's castle, the GM should never be like, "Oh yeah, you went where you're supposed to. Here's another momentum."
Well, yeah, of course, of
Yeah,
course. I was.
yeah. I just feel like I need to clarify that because I feel like at some point somebody's gonna be like, "Hey, we figured out we were supposed to go here," and the GM's gonna be like, "Yeah, because I told you you should go there."
Yeah. Good to point it out. Definitely have that in your book. But
Yeah, there's
yes.
always gonna be one guy that's gonna try like gaming the system like that.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers most of the stuff I was curious about for the system. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about for it?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention was I think I kind of touched base on this really early on about talking about conspiracy theories and cover up stories is like a fun element of the game. I just wanted to mention like how one thing we did in the system is there's a social bar called unease, which is essentially if the players are doing anything in the game that would gather suspicion, because again, the beacon isn't supposed to be known, right? So if you're in a town and you start making it very obvious that you're inspecting this activity, you'll start getting unease, which for the entire group, it's a shared resource that basically just makes you roll worse and worse when you're interacting with civilians. But what the players can do to counter this is they can either start creating cover up stories right there in the moment to be like, oh no, we're actually only here because we're just investigating this the sewer issue basically, and then the GM might choose to be like, okay, that's a believable excuse, like remove some unease, or you could even like just try to gain favor back from the public by like buying around a beer at the bar or something like that. So we just like we wanted to make sure that like that element of cover up stories and conspiracy theories was built right into the actual system itself and left like encourages players to actually do it and interact with it.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important little background element to a lot of cryptid stories of like, yeah, the men in black have to cover it up. It's not the focus, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any DMing advice you want to hand out to anybody listening?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest advice that I can give to all DMs, but I'd say towards newer DMs for sure, is communicate with your table. I've seen a lot of like horror stories and just general disputes on various subreddits and forums about people being like, "Oh, this happened with my group," and usually the response should just be like, "Well, talk to your group, not to the online people." Um, I find that like a lot of common issues can just be solved just by talking to people and saying to them how you feel about it and getting them to give you their perspective essentially.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, it's a social game. Yeah, if you
Yeah,
have, just like in if you're playing, I don't know, like basketball and someone else like double dribbles and like they say, well, at my court we're allowed to do like 3 steps, and you say, well, no, you can only do 2 steps for our game. Um, well, it's just a communication issue. Like you have different expectations going into the game, and you need to just talk it out and solve it.
exactly. I just find there's so many problems. I guess that's just general life advice too. Like you're saying, like it doesn't matter if it's D&D, if it's basketball, if it's just a work thing. Just talk to people. I know for some people like social anxiety is a thing. Like I totally get that, but I think it's a good skill to work on and develop is just open communication with expectations. And if somebody's doing something that upsets you, at the end of the day, if you're playing a game together, you're probably friends already, or you at least have common ground to stand from. Just talk it out, hash it out.
Yeah, I think my impression of a lot of those posts on like D&D Reddits about like asking for advice is somewhat like that this is a young person who hasn't necessarily noticed that yes, when you have a social problem, the solution is to talk with that person and not
Yeah,
there isn't some secret solution that we can provide you on the internet. You have to go and talk to the person you have a problem with.
exactly. And it's definitely one of those things where it's like when you're younger, it's probably also more intimidating too because you think you're gonna say something wrong or you're gonna do something wrong. But it's like I think that's a good spot to actually develop that skill for life because if you can't talk to your friend about a game of essentially not to boil it down, but a game of make believe essentially, like right, like you're not going
Yeah,
to be able to do it for larger things in life. So great time to start practicing that skill is when you're playing a fun game with your friends, and if somebody does something that is not what you would expect, talk to them.
mm-hmm. Your comment about like Oh, they're afraid of making mistakes. Well, you probably will, but there's nothing you can do to stop that.
That's the best thing about life though is to make mistakes. That's something that like I've kind of honestly had a key philosophy for myself is like you're going to make mistakes in life. Embrace that and learn from it. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn how to grow from that mistake. The only time a mistake's a real mistake is when you choose not to look back at it and you choose to just shove it under the couch and just never think about it again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, our
We're
little
human.
GMing and our little GMing advice has turned into life advice in general. But
Yeah, but that's the thing though. That's the great thing about D&D and just like any like TTRPG is it's a social thing and social elements are a core part of life and you can learn so many things from GMing or being a player and how to interact with the world around you.
yeah,
I could talk
definitely.
for hours about that, but I won't.
I feel like yes, GMing has felt like there's so many different aspects of like learning and culture that you can bring in. I mean, we talked about like religion and folk tales during this that like are relevant, but like you could also have like archae archaeology is relevant. Like we talked a little bit about that, but like architecture often can feature in monster
Yep,
stories, and there's so many different like fields that get brought into gaming because RPGs are kind of a simulation of the real world. So you can bring in whatever knowledge of the real world that you want.
exactly. And you can take inspiration from real life events, real media. I think it's a very common thing for people with storytelling is to take real events and see what it would look like in a different setting, but that doesn't make the fact that it's fantasy any different from what you can learn from those interactions.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan. That's cool advice. I like it. Where can people find Ethereal if they want to look it up?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. People can check out our YouTube channel, Fine Ground Cryptids. Um, same Twitch name, Fine Ground Cryptids, and I'll just shout out that we even have a quick guide for our game coming out very soon, so keep an eye out for that. About mid-March, we're hoping to have our quick guide and our Discord open for people to join. And if you want to hunt down Bigfoot or take on aliens or anything like that, that's a great time to jump into it.
I have a very large backlog of episodes, so this is going to come out sometime in the summer. So
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Okay, well, in that case, the quick guide will already be out then.
yeah, perfect. All right. So I'll get a link from you for all that stuff, and yeah,
Yep.
people can check it out in the episode description. And yeah, it's cool stuff.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. This is great.
Thank you. Have a good one.
I hope you enjoyed learning about Ryan's cryptid containment TTRPG, Ethereal. You can find out more using the links in the episode description. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give the podcast a 5-star rating on your listening app. It'll help the show reach more people so we can get more exciting guests like Ryan and many others. If you haven't enjoyed this episode, what are you still doing here? All right, that's all. I'm Isaac Shaker. This is Setting the Stage, and thank you for listening.